others, organisms move and decompose organic materials, reproduce, die, and generate various byproducts. These chemical and physical changes cause soil particles, sand, silt, and clay, to be grouped or clumped together. These secondary groups, or clumps, are known as soil aggregates and influence soil structure. Root growth, freezing and thawing, and burrowing insects and other animals contribute to changes in soil structure over time. These processes increase the ratio of macropores to micropores, improving soil aeration and root growth. Pores occur both within and between aggregates and are classified either as macropores or micropores. As the terms imply, macropores are relatively large spaces, mainly between aggregates, while micropores are relatively small spaces, mainly between soil particles. Macropores become filled with air as water drains from the soil, and micropores retain water. The size and shape of soil aggregates determine the amount of macropore and micropore space in a soil. Soil texture influences pore space as well, with coarse soils, sands, being dominated by macropores, and fine soils, clays, having a higher percentage of micropores. For trees and other plants, it is best to have a balance between macropore and micropore space. A well-structured soil has sufficient macropore space for air movement, aeration, and micropore space for water retention. Soils with poor structure have a limited capacity to meet the air and water needs of plants. The size and shape of soil aggregates are important in water and air availability to tree roots. Soil structure modifies the influence of texture on pore space and drainage. For example, a well-aggregated structure facilitates aeration and water movement. Poor soil structure and soil compaction, destruction of soil aggregates, can have adverse effects on water infiltration and percolation. Soil aggregates and accompanying pore spaces are easily disrupted by soil compaction. When soil aggregates are destroyed by vehicles, foot traffic, or other actions, pore space is greatly reduced, especially macropores, which tend to be filled with air. Soils vary in their susceptibility to compaction. Those with a high percentage of fine particles, clays, are easily compacted, while soils with a high percentage of sand are less prone to compaction. Soils with relatively high moisture content are much more easily compacted than dry soils. Surface compaction is created when aggregates are destroyed and the fine soil particles at the surface create a crust, much like shingles on a roof, inhibiting water infiltration. Compacted soils restrict root growth, reduce water infiltration and availability, and limit the movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the root zone. Compacted soils can also limit the biological component of soil by reducing the large pores required by larger organisms to move through the soil. Bulk density is the mass, weight, of dried soil per unit of undisturbed soil volume. Bulk density may be used as a measurement of soil compaction. Dependent on soil texture, relatively high bulk densities may indicate a low percentage of total pore space and high compaction levels. Soils with higher bulk densities are usually less conducive to root growth. Soil pH is a measure of the acidity or alkalinity of soil. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. A pH of 7 is considered neutral, neither acidic nor alkaline. Soils with a pH less than 7 are acidic, and those with a pH greater than 7 are alkaline. Because pH is a logarithmic function, A pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 7, and a pH of 5 is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 7. Although quite variable for different tree species, a pH in the range of 6.0 to 6.5 is generally favorable for most plants. Soil pH has many effects on the ecology and chemistry of the soil. Soil pH may affect which species will grow and which soil organisms are present. One of the most important effects of pH on tree growth is the availability of minerals. The photo on the right shows iron deficiency symptoms, something commonly associated with alkaline soils. Each essential element is available for uptake within a relatively narrow pH range. At certain pH levels, essential elements form chemical compounds that are insoluble in water and thus largely unavailable to plants because roots can only take up minerals dissolved in water. For example, in highly acidic soils with a pH of 5.5 or below, phosphorus may be deficient, while other elements may become toxic, such as manganese and copper. In alkaline soils, iron, zinc, and manganese may be unavailable. Micronutrients such as iron and manganese may then be deficient, causing chlorosis or yellowing of the foliage. The availability of calcium, magnesium, and potassium, however, may increase with higher pH. It is possible to alter soil pH to achieve a more desirable growing medium. Sulfur may be added to lower the pH, or lime may be added to raise the pH. Altering the pH of the superficial layers of the soil is relatively easy. However, it is more difficult to alter subsurface pH. This is particularly true in urban environments where contamination from alkaline building materials is common. Additionally, many soils have a high buffering capacity or resistance to changes in pH, especially soils high in clay or organic matter. In such cases, amendments may have just temporary effects and may have to be reapplied. Minerals required for tree growth, essential elements, dissolve in water, making them available for absorption by tree roots. In solution, these elements are charged particles called ions. Negatively charged ions are called anions. Positively charged ions are called cations. The cation exchange capacity, CEC, is a measure of the soil's attraction, retention, and exchange of positively charged cations. In essence, CEC may be used as a gauge of soil fertility. Organic matter and clay particles normally carry a negative charge. This negative charge attracts and holds cations, giving soils high in clay and organic matter a high cation exchange capacity. Fine textured soils that contain a relatively high proportion of clay and/or organic matter will tend to be more fertile than coarse textured soils. The attraction between cations and soil particles minimizes the tendency of positively charged minerals to leach or wash through the soil. Sand particles, conversely, have little electrical charge. Sandy soils tend to have lower CEC values for this reason. Soil salinity is a measure of the quantity of mineral ions dissolved in the soil solution, water. Although mineral ions in the soil water are essential to plants, excess quantities can be harmful. Certain types of soils have a tendency to accumulate soil salts to excessive amounts and must be monitored and managed closely. The recommended treatment for excessive salts in the soil is to leach them through the soil solution with low salinity water. Sodic soils have high levels of sodium and low levels of total soluble salts. Sodic soils have a tendency to crust and are associated with high pH, nutrient deficiencies or imbalances, poor soil structure, and sometimes levels of sodium that are toxic to sensitive plants. Correction is usually possible with the continued use of good irrigation water. More intensive remedies involve replacing the sodium with calcium using a calcium-based soil amendment. Soil is an ecosystem containing billions of organisms. Although a very small percentage of soil organisms may damage roots, the majority are directly or indirectly beneficial. Organisms such as certain insects, mites, millipedes, earthworms, fungi, and bacteria that inhabit the soil and litter layer increase aeration and accelerate decay by degrading organic matter. Nematodes, microscopic roundworms, can parasitize tree roots, and some transmit disease. Other nematodes, however, feed on pathogenic, disease-causing organisms and are beneficial to trees. Other organisms found in the soil ecosystem include bacteria and fungi. Most of these are an essential part of the balance of life, helping to decompose organic matter or aid in nutrient uptake. Very few cause diseases in plants. The diversity of organisms living, moving, and interacting in the soil is often referred to as the soil food web. The rhizosphere is the zone of intense biological activity surrounding actively elongating roots. As roots extend through the soil, the root caps and external layers are sloughed off and materials, sugars, from the roots are released into the soil. This is a constant source of organic matter on which microorganisms feed. The rhizosphere is an altered environment within the soil where many organisms flourish. Chemical properties within the rhizosphere can be very different from the surrounding soil. For example, pH can be 1 or 2 units higher or lower in the rhizosphere compared with the bulk soil pH. Mycorrhizae, literally meaning fungus roots, are specialized root structures created when mycorrhizal fungi infect roots of a suitable host plant. Most plants have associated mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizal fungi live in a symbiotic relationship with the roots. This means that the fungi and roots both benefit from the relationship. The roots provide a place for the fungi to live and provide food, sugar. The fungi increase the capacity of roots to absorb water and essential elements, especially phosphorus, to protect against certain disease-causing fungi and help the tree survive stressful conditions. Nutrient cycling is especially important in natural plant systems. As a plant grows, roots absorb essential mineral elements from the soil solution and produce new woody material and leaves. As seasons pass, plants or plant parts die and are returned to the soil where they are broken down and eventually decomposed by soil organisms and weathering processes. Decomposition releases the nutrients that were bound in the organic material back into the soil where they become available once again to plant roots. The bodies of soil microorganisms serve as a storage bank for plant nutrients. Even though the nutrients are unavailable to plants while the organisms are alive, as the organisms feed on each other, nutrients are constantly being released back into the soil for plant uptake. This storage bank also reduces the loss of nutrients that would otherwise be leached through the soil. Soil and water exist in a dynamic equilibrium that makes it almost impossible to discuss one without mentioning the other. The physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil are all influenced by soil moisture. Arborists must understand this relationship to conduct an effective water management program that will improve and/or maintain tree health. The volume and size of soil pores and the total surface area of the particles determine the amount of water that a soil can hold. Soils with a large percentage of micropores have a high water-holding capacity. Conversely, a soil with a greater amount of macropore space than micropore space has a lower water-holding capacity. For example, clay soils have a high water-holding capacity because pore space is dominated by micropores, while sandy soils with low micropore space have a lower water-holding capacity. Water that drains from the macropores under the force of gravity is called gravitational water. A soil is said to be at field capacity immediately after gravitational water has drained away. Water that remains is held in the micropores and is called capillary water. Once a soil is at field capacity, water is classified as being available or unavailable. Available water can be absorbed by plant roots, while unavailable water is held tightly by the soil. When available water is depleted, plants may experience water stress and wilting of leaves may occur. The addition of water to the soil within the root zone reverses these effects. When water stress is prolonged and severe, however, trees may reach a point where they cannot recover. This point is called the permanent wilting point. Tree roots need both air and water in order to function and grow. A delicate balance of water and gases, mostly oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide, exists in the soil pore spaces. Tree roots require oxygen, but they also give off carbon dioxide as respiration takes place. Gas exchange between the soil and the atmosphere generally occurs by diffusion through the soil surface. Oxygen levels tend to be higher near the soil surface. If there is insufficient gas exchange from the atmosphere through the soil, there may be an oxygen deficit to the roots. Similarly, if the concentration of carbon dioxide increases above critical levels and becomes toxic, root injury can occur. Gas exchange is often limited in saturated and/or compacted soils. Moreover, in many urban situations, pavement and other hardscape elements severely limit gas exchange with the atmosphere. Soil texture plays a major role in water infiltration and percolation. Layers of varying soil texture are common in urban soils and can lead to runoff as well as poor drainage and aeration. If a layer of coarse soil, sand, is on top of a fine-textured soil, clay, water will accumulate in the upper layer as it slowly infiltrates into the lower layer. Conversely, if the coarse layer is below the fine layer, the water will not drain into the lower layer until the upper layer is completely saturated. If a tree is planted in clay soil and the backfill is amended with a more coarse soil, the planting hole may act as a bowl and retain too much water, the teacup effect. If irrigation and/or precipitation water is held within the root zone soil for a long time, an aeration deficit may occur and consequently root damage. Placing gravel in the bottom of planting holes, pits, or containers does not improve drainage as commonly thought because the water remains in the finer textured soil until saturation is reached.